Shift Radio continues right now.
We're talking about Tuesday's presidential debates, in quotes, because I guess a debate means you actually have to disagree on things. I mean, it's clear that they didn't like each other, and it was kind of like two kids arguing on a playground, but they weren't talking about anything of real substance. Were there any real disagreements? I'm going to start by talking about the very first question that was asked in this town hall meeting by a college student worrying about the job prospects and student debt. And the very first thing that Mitt Romney said is that he wants to increase government aid for education. He wants to step up Pell Grants. In other words, he wants to make the problem worse. He wants to make sure that the government gets involved in increasing the subsidies for education so that college tuitions continue to go higher and higher and higher. Instead of arguing for a free market solution and pointing out how government student loans drive up the cost of college and promising less government so that the free market can reduce the cost, all Mitt Romney promised was more of the same failed policies that have driven educational costs through the roof and that are responsible for over $1 trillion of student loans. Here, listen to the man himself.
When I was governor of Massachusetts, to get a high school degree, you had to pass an exam. If you graduated in the top quarter of your class, we gave you a John and Abigail Adams scholarship, 4 years tuition free to the college of your choice in Massachusetts. It's a public institution. I want to make sure we keep our Pell Grant program growing. We're also going to have our loan program so that people are able to afford school.
Yes. People are able to afford school. How about let tuitions go down? Then they can afford school. The reason that students need the loans is because the government guaranteed loans have driven the price of tuition through the roof. That's why the students need loans. And again, this is a creation of government. Government deliberately drives up the cost of college so that they can buy the votes of students who now can't afford to go. And so the solution is a government loan. But if the government never got involved, college would be inexpensive and it wouldn't be a problem. But then if it wasn't a problem, nobody would need government and you couldn't get the votes of students by promising them government guaranteed loans so they could afford to go to college, which would have been a lot less expensive if the loans hadn't been guaranteed in the first place. That's how the debate started off, and it was downhill from there. You know, one of the big things that Romney wanted was protectionism, right? He was a big proponent of protectionism. He wants to protect American industry and American jobs from Chinese competition, right? And how does he want to do that? He wants to basically slap massive tariffs on American citizens who want to buy Chinese products. Remember, he's saying he wants to cut taxes for the middle class. No, he doesn't. He wants to raise taxes on the middle class because he wants to tax everybody who shops at Walmart. He wants to increase the price of all the goods that middle-class Americans buy when they go to shop at Walmart. Now, isn't that a tax? I mean, the Chinese aren't going to pay that tax. Americans are going to pay that tax every time they buy a product that was made in China. That's a tax. So when Romney says he doesn't want to raise taxes on the middle class or the poor, he's not telling the truth. He wants to hit everybody with a major tax increase. He just wants to call it a tax on China. China doesn't pay the tax. American consumers pay the tax when they buy products. And then if they end up not buying Chinese products because they're more expensive, they buy a product made someplace else, but that product is now more expensive than the one they otherwise would have bought. The fact that they're forced to pay more for products is a tax. Meanwhile, I talked about that Fox News poll. We even got a call. One of the questions was by somebody who was worried about the rising cost of living. But Americans are already worried about inflation and rising prices, yet not only does Romney not hear their cries, he wants to make the problem bigger. He wants to make sure that prices rise even faster in America by slapping tariffs on imports. Listen to what the governor had to say on this.
We're going to have to make sure that as we trade with other nations, that they play by the rules, and China hasn't. One of the reasons, or one of the ways they don't play by the rules, is artificially holding down the value of their currency. Because if they put their currency down low, that means their prices on their goods are low. And that makes them advantageous in the marketplace. We lose sales, and manufacturers here in the U.S. making the same products can't compete. China has been a currency manipulator for years and years and years. And the president has a regular opportunity to label them as a currency manipulator, but refuses to do so. On day one, I will label China a currency manipulator, which will allow me as president to be able to put in place, if necessary, tariffs where I believe that they are taking unfair advantage of our manufacturers. So we're going to make sure that people we trade with around the world play by the rules.
Yeah, in other words, a vote for Mitt Romney is a vote for a trade war with China, which is a war that we will, in fact, lose because we aren't even armed to fight it. Of course, there's no way he's going to do that. He's just saying that because he thinks he's going to get votes. There's no way that he's going to do that because the minute he gets into office, the Chinese are going to sit down and have a discussion with him and get his mind right. And he'll realize exactly, who plays the tunes and who dances in this relationship. And there's no way that he's actually going to do that. But somehow he thinks he's going to win votes. But think about the bad economics of what he's suggesting. How is it going to make our manufacturers more competitive if we increase the cost of their components? He's also arguing here for a stronger Chinese currency, which is by definition a weaker U.S. currency. So he wants our currency to be weaker. He wants prices in America to go even higher, including gas prices, which we'll talk about later. If President Romney were successful and China actually did what he wants, then gas prices would skyrocket in America as a result of the weaker dollar and stronger RMB that would result from this. I mean, talk about being oblivious to inflation. If you want an even weaker dollar, inflation is going to be an even bigger problem. Hey, I got Chris calling from Manhattan, has a comment about Mitt Romney and inflation, or the debates in inflation. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Peter. Yeah, I mean, he was asked point blank by that one guy about higher prices. Why doesn't he just jump on this issue? And
well, there was one guy, and we actually have that discussion.
Mr. President, I voted for you in 2008. What have you done or accomplished to earn my vote in 2012? I'm not that optimistic as I was in 2012. Most things I need for everyday living are very expensive.
So he asked that question, and then I don't even need to play Obama's answer because he doesn't even address the point. Not at nowhere in his answer does he actually address the point. And then I was thinking, gee, maybe Mitt Romney will come in here and say something about it. And no, Mitt Romney ignored that. Everybody wants to pretend that there's no inflation. Because nobody wants to say that we need higher interest rates. Because the minute you say that there's too much inflation, well, then you got to go to the culprit, which is the Federal Reserve. And why is the Federal Reserve creating inflation? To monetize the debt and prop up the banks and prop up the housing market. So if you acknowledge that there's an inflation problem, then you have to come up with a solution to the inflation problem, which no one wants to discuss because it means higher interest rates, and it means, the government has to slash spending. It means bankruptcies on Wall Street. It means a weaker housing market. So rather than having to deal with that problem, they just simply pretend that there's no problem at all. So nobody wants to mention the fact that there is inflation. Next, I want to talk about Romney's failure to defend his statement that President Obama referenced. Obama said that Mitt Romney said in an interview that he thought it was fair that he pay a 14% tax, that he thought that was fair, that he pay a lower tax rate than the average middle-class Americans. And Romney never addressed that point. And when your opponent accuses you of something and you don't even defend yourself, it's almost like, you admit that you're wrong and you're just conceding the point. He didn't even want to go there and defend his 14% tax rate. And I think that was a real shame because he had an opportunity to explain economics, not only to the country, but to the president, who obviously doesn't understand it at all. First, one of the things he could have said is, he could have said, Mr. President, do you know why my rate was only 14%? You know how come it was 14%? One was he gave about 20% or 30% of his income to charity. How many Americans give that larger percentage? I would have said, Mr. President, how much money did you donate to charity last year? Here's how much I donated. Here's what percent of my income went to charity. Would you have preferred that I not gave that income to charity, that money to charity? Would it have been better if I just spent it on myself? Would it have been better if I just blew it on fancy things? Isn't it a good thing that I gave that money to charity? Don't you think that the church will do good things with that money? Or do you think that people shouldn't give to charity? That would have been number one. That would have been very easy to put the president on the spot. Hey, I would have paid a lot more in taxes if I hadn't given all this money to charity. So why don't you take his tax rate and add his charitable contributions and see what his real rate was? Because after all, he didn't get to keep the money he gave to charity any more than he got to keep the money he paid in taxes. So if you look at how much Mitt Romney got to keep, right, the money he didn't give to the government or wasn't taken from the government, and the money he didn't give to charity, it's a whole different story. But then number two, he should have said, Mr. President, do you realize that most of my income came from dividends? Don't you realize that American corporations have the highest tax rate in the world? We're at 35%. So I'm a shareholder in these companies. And before I paid my 14%, I paid 35% on that income already as a shareholder. So in effect, I actually paid not 14%, but about 50%. Don't you consider that confiscatory for the government to take 50% of corporate earnings? Now, if there was no corporate income tax, then they just could raise the tax rate that Romney paid to 50%, and it'd be the exact same thing. So Romney had an opportunity to explain the double taxation. And I would have said, so, Mr. President, do you really want to raise my income tax to 40% on top of the 35% that the corporate income tax? Do you really want to have an effective corporate income tax in this country of 80%? Is that what you want? How many jobs do you think that will create, Mr. President? You'll destroy whatever jobs remain. If President Obama has his way and we raise the effective corporate income tax rate in America, which is already the highest in the world, if we make it even higher, is that supposed to grow the economy? This was an opportunity for Romney to win this argument and make the president look like a fool. But you know what? He didn't even take it. Does he not even understand it himself? Or is he too afraid to challenge the president from the right? Instead, he's too busy trying to get to his left that he doesn't want to defend the free market or explain how it works. Also, he blew another opportunity when it came to this Lilly Ledbetter nonsense and equal pay for equal work. There was a question that came in about that. And I was trying to see if I had the sound, but I forgot to write. I thought I wrote it down, but he was asked. There was a question about equal pay for equal work, and he came back and basically went on and on about how when he was governor, how he went out of his way to hire women, how he looked for women, he had piles of women's resumes, and of course, instead of actually explaining the economics of this foolhardy legislation, everybody likes this. Yes, equal pay for equal work. How about letting the free market decide wages and salaries and benefits? Because here's the problem that he could have explained is how all these rules backfire on women. Let's assume I'm an employer and I've got a guy doing a job and I'm paying him $60,000 a year. And now I want to hire a second person, but the labor market is softer and there's plenty of job applicants. And I think I can find somebody to do the same job for maybe $40,000. Now, I'm not cutting the pay of my existing worker, but wages are lower. There's more unemployment. I can find somebody to do the job for $40,000. Now, can I hire a woman and pay her $40,000? No, I can't. Because what if she finds out the guy's making $60 and I get sued? So I have to hire the guy. So even though there's plenty of women who want to do the job for $40,000, I can't hire one of the women. I have to hire a man and pay him $40,000 because it's okay to pay two men, right, different amounts of money to do the same job. I can pay one guy $60,000 and I can pay one guy $40,000, no problem. But I can't pay the guy $60 and the woman $40. So what's my alternative? Don't hire the woman. And of course, all of these special protections meant for women basically takes a big neon sign, puts it on a woman's head, and says, don't hire me, right? If you're a small business, right, and you're only going to hire a couple of people, why would you pick a woman? After all, you're going to open up a huge can of worms that there's sexism, there's discrimination, that you're not paying her enough. Just hire the white guy and, no one's going to argue with you. No one's going to bother you. No one's going to get in your face. So again, Romney blows an opportunity to explain how these well-intentioned laws are backfiring on the government. Hey, let's move along to Romney's government plan for energy. You know, instead of challenging Obama and saying we should have no federal energy plan, that we should abolish the Department of Energy and just let the free market decide on our energy. Let the market satisfy the demands for energy. Let's have a competitive free market where the government is neutral. No. He wants a big government energy policy. He just wants different priorities. He just wants to run this federal energy program differently from the way Obama. So in concept, he agrees with Obama that we need the government involvement in energy. It's just that we need somebody else micromanaging the economy because Mitt Romney feels he'll do a better job managing our energy policy than the president. But unfortunately, nobody trusts the free market.
Look, I want to make sure we use our oil, our coal, our gas, our nuclear, our renewables. I believe very much in our renewable capabilities. Ethanol, wind, solar will be an important part of our energy mix. Let's take advantage of the energy resources we have, as well as the energy sources for the future. And if we do that, if we do what I'm planning on doing, which is getting us energy independent, for North America energy independence, within 8 years, you're going to see manufacturing jobs come back because our energy is low cost.
Yeah. Yeah. So what difference does it make what Romney feels? He wants us to use this. He wants us to use that. How about saying, look, I don't know. Let the market decide. The government's not supposed to pick the winners and losers, the free market. You know, talking about jobs, you know, where Romney really missed an opportunity to nail President Obama was on immigration. And, of course, Mitt Romney was more talking about how, you know, we got to crack down on illegal immigration. He doesn't want to point out all the benefits that we get from the labor of immigrants and the fact that so many Americans don't want to do these jobs because the government's got them on welfare and unemployment. And so we create disincentives for Americans to work. And if we didn't have foreigners coming in and filling the gap, you know, we'd have an even bigger economic problem. We'd have even more inflation. Prices would be even higher if we couldn't get immigrant labor coming in and do these jobs. You didn't want to point this out. But when President Obama mentioned a statistic, Romney could have jumped all over him. Obama said that illegal immigrants, workers crossing the border to come to America, is at a 40-year low. As if it's at a 40-year low because of his tough policy to crack down on illegal immigrants, right? He's trying to take credit for the fact that Mexican workers coming across the border, the number coming over is at a 40-year low. See, what Mitt Romney should have done, and this was like a layup. I mean, he teed the thing up, and he could have hit this thing out of the park, but he didn't even mention it. The reason that illegal immigrant crossings are at a 40-year low is because there's no jobs. The Obama economy is so bad that even illegal immigrants can't find jobs. That's what he should have pointed out. That's why the immigrants aren't coming. In fact, there are a lot of illegal immigrants who are leaving the country because they can't find jobs. There's more employment opportunity in Mexico, maybe. I mean, is the president not going to be satisfied until the Mexicans have a problem with all the Americans crossing the border because they're looking for jobs in Mexico because they can't find any jobs in America? Would he consider that to be a success if we actually reverse the flow? Right? Instead of illegal Mexicans coming in, we got Americans going down to Mexico. I mean, this was a great opportunity for the president, for Mitt Romney to point this out. He probably would have even got some laughs too, but he just let it skate by. I mean, there were so many missed opportunities. All he wanted to talk about was his 5-point plan, his 5-point plan, his 5-point plan, instead of really talking about free market economics and how the president's economic planning had destroyed the country. I don't want to hear about your plan. I want the free market. I want someone to argue against government planning and for the free markets and explain why it's government planning and micromanagement that are responsible for the mess that we're in now and why more government planning is just going to make it bigger. One of the persons that asked the question asked Mitt Romney, how are you going to be different from Bush? I thought it was a great question because she said she wasn't happy with the president. She voted for him, but she's not happy with what he's done, but she didn't like the Bush years. And so how are you different from Bush? Because I don't like where the economy is now, but I don't like where it was going before. And this was a great opportunity for Mitt Romney to address a lot of voters who had that exact same concern and really differentiate himself from President Bush, and he couldn't do it. I mean, what he identified was ridiculous. Let me play the Romney's response.
President Bush and I are different people, and these are different times. And that's why my 5-point plan is so different than what he would have done. I mean, for instance, we can now, by virtue of new technology, actually get all the energy we need in North America without having to go to the Arabs or the Venezuelans or anyone else. That wasn't true in his time. That's why my policy starts with a very robust policy to get all that energy in North America and become energy secure. Number 2, trade. I'll crack down on China. President Bush didn't. I'm also going to dramatically expand trade in Latin America. It's been growing about 12% per year over a long period of time. I want to add more free trade agreements so we have more trade.
So, first of all, he said he's a different person than Bush. Well, obviously, he's a different person. His first thing he said was, well, it's different times because we have energy basically in the Bakken formation. Well, how is that a difference between him and Bush? That's a difference in the fact that there's energy. But he says we need his comprehensive plan to develop those resources. No, we don't. We just need the free market. That's no difference. Then he said, well, I'm gonna get tough on China, and Bush didn't get tough on China. No, he's not. I mean, he's talking about it, but if he actually did get tough on China, that would make things worse, not better. But I thought it's ironic that he says he wants to cut down on trade with China so we can expand trade with Latin America. I mean, that doesn't even make any sense. That's inconsistent, right? He wants protection, so we have less trade with Asia, but he wants more free trade with Latin America. What is he, for free trade, or is he a protectionist? And if he wants free trade with Latin America, why can't we have free trade with China? And if he wants to protect us from Chinese imports, why does he want to protect us from Latin American imports? The whole thing is nonsense. But, here's the rest of how he differentiates himself from George Bush.
Number 3, I'm going to get us to a balanced budget. President Bush didn't. President Obama was right. He said that was outrageous to have deficits as high as $500 billion under the Bush years. He was right. But then he put in place deficits twice that size for every one of his 4 years. And his forecast for the next 4 years is more deficits, almost that large. So that's the next area I'm different than President Bush. And then let's take the last one, championing small business. Our party has been focused on big business too long. I came through small business. I understand how hard it is to start a small business. That's why everything I'll do is designed to help small businesses grow and add jobs. I want to keep their taxes down on small business. I want regulators to see their job as encouraging small enterprise, not crushing it.
All right. So first of all, he's saying that he's for small business. Well, I mean, everybody says they're for small business. Even Obama says he's for small business. Just saying you're for small business that's not a difference. They're all for small business. And then he says that, well, the difference between me and Bush is Bush didn't balance the budget. Well, neither does he. He doesn't balance the budget either. It's not even close. In fact, the deficits that he is advocating are bigger than any of the deficits under the Bush years. So what is he talking about? I mean, this is nonsense. In other words, he's saying there's no difference between me and Bush. Here are all the things he could have said, right? Because first of all, George Bush was a big spender. He was one of the biggest spenders since Lyndon Johnson. In fact, George Bush didn't veto a single bill until he was president for 6 years. 6 years. He didn't veto anything in his first term. And in fact, the only reason he vetoed something after 6 years was because it became an issue that, hey, he hadn't vetoed anything. And so he finally vetoed something because people noticed that he hadn't vetoed anything. In fact, the only president who vetoed fewer bills than George Bush in the 20th century, right, was Warren Harding. And Harding was only president for 2 years because he died in office. But obviously if he had survived his term, he would have vetoed more bills. Now, there are some presidents in the 18th century or not, or early 19th century that vetoed fewer. But that's because, Congress didn't pass that many laws back then. But in the 20th century, George Bush was the champion of vetoing nothing. In other words, he greenlighted every spending plan that hit his desk. How about if Romney would have said, I'm going to veto things. I'm going to say no to government spending, right? Or how about pointing out that George Bush, his ownership society, he was championing the housing market. He was a big cheerleader for government trying to get involved in helping low-income people buying houses they couldn't afford. How about saying we're not going to do that? George Bush presided over a bubble economy that was built on government subsidies and stimulus and cheap money. That's why we had the financial crisis of 2008. How about saying that I'm going to be different? I'm going to be a real free market president. President Bush just talked about the free market. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to champion it. I'm going to repeal regulations, not pile on more like President Bush did. He should have pointed out the similarities between Obama and Bush. He should have told that woman, hey, if you didn't like the Bush administration, why are you voting for more of it under Obama? I'm the difference. I represent change of both parties. That both Obama and Bush believed in big government, in central planning, in central banking, in artificial stimulus, in this whole, consumption demand-driven economic model. Saying, no, I'm different. I believe in real free market, in productivity, in savings, in production, in supply side, in Adam Smith, and talked about that stuff. I mean, would he have gone over the head of the average American voter? I don't know. I mean, maybe he could have put it in some simple terms and people would have understood and they would have seen real hope for change instead of just promising more of the same. I mean, I think after listening to that answer, that woman is probably going to say, oh, he sounds just like George Bush, so I'm just going to vote for President Obama. I want to keep talking about some of the things that Mitt Romney said. In particular, let's talk about Mitt Romney's promise to continue to soak the rich. Right? Everybody is saying, oh, Mitt Romney wants to cut taxes on the rich. No, he wants to continue to soak them. In fact, during the debate, Mitt Romney said that he's happy that the top 5% pay 60% of the taxes. And he wants to make sure that it stays that way. So according to Mitt Romney, that's fair. That 5% of the people pay 60% of the taxes. And not only is Mitt Romney okay with that, he wants to make sure that that doesn't change. How about bringing more people into the economy? How about getting a bunch of people who pay no taxes because they're living off of the government? How about getting them into the workforce, let them pay a little taxes so that 5% can catch a break? So they don't have to pay all these taxes, so they can use their money to grow the economy instead. Or how about just making the moral argument that they earned that money and we have no right to confiscate it from them? That people work hard, they risk their capital, they risk their time, they employ people, they satisfy the desires of consumers with goods and services. How about letting them keep what they earn instead of confiscating it because they supposedly are not entitled to it and everybody else should divvy up the spoils? Where's that Mitt Romney? Anyway, here he is promising to soak the rich.
The middle-income families in America have been crushed over the last 4 years. So I want to get some relief to middle-income families. That's part one. Now, how about deductions? Because I'm going to bring rates down across the board for everybody. But I'm going to limit deductions and exemptions and credits, particularly for people at the high end, because I am not going to have people at the high end pay less than they're paying now. The top 5% of taxpayers will continue to pay 60% of the income tax the nation collects. So that'll stay the same. Middle-income people are going to get a tax break.
So in other words, they're both arguing to soak the rich. Romney just says he wants to rain a little less on the rich than Obama does. He wants to soak them. He just doesn't want to drench them with quite as much water. I mean, this is the Republican. This is the choice that we've got. It's all about degree. How much water do we want to soak the rich with? Instead of explaining why we need lower taxes so we can actually grow the economy? Or how about being in favor of eliminating the income tax completely? How about nobody pays an income tax? How about explaining why an income tax is destructive? That's Gary Johnson's position. Wouldn't it have been nice to have Gary Johnson in this debate arguing for no income taxes and then let Romney talk about why that's a bad idea, why the government needs an income tax? I mean, an income tax is inconsistent with everything this country stands for. It's inconsistent with the Constitution. It's inconsistent with limited government or sound economics. It's a horrible tax. It punishes what we need and encourages what we don't need. If you wanted to design a tax to undermine an economy, it would be the income tax. I can't think of a tax that is better. If you were purposely trying to undermine economic growth and hurt particularly the middle class and the poor, I can't think of a better tax than an income tax that is progressive and hits the rich. right? Because when you tax the rich, what do you get less of? You get less investment. You get less job creation. You get less production. Yes, you confiscate some of the money from the rich, which I don't think is fair. But who suffers the most? The rich? No. In general, the rich still have enough money to buy all the things they want to buy and live a good life. What they don't have is the extra money to grow the economy so that the poor can live a better life, so that the middle class can live a better life. So it all backfires, just like government always does. I would have liked Mitt Romney to attack Obama on that, to call him out on that, and have that kind of argument, because he would have made the president look like a fool if he would have done that. And maybe there's enough people in the center that would have noticed that type of intelligent debate, that kind of real difference between the two parties. You know, another point where Romney could have talked about but didn't was in outsourcing, because, you know, Obama wants to accuse him of outsourcing jobs to China. And what Romney should have done was defended outsourcing and talked about why if U.S. companies didn't outsource, that jobs would be destroyed, that a lot of the lower cost jobs that are outsourced are responsible for more higher paying jobs that are still insourced. Because if a lot of companies couldn't lower their costs by taking advantage of lower labor costs abroad and, you know, lower regulations and taxes abroad, they wouldn't be able to compete in the global economy. And so they would probably have to go out of business and fire all their American workers. Instead, they fire some American workers so that the other American workers could keep their jobs. But if it was up to the president, if they couldn't outsource it all, then we would probably just shut down the entire business and all the labor would be done abroad. Now, what Obama could have also, or Romney could have also said is, why do we have to outsource when we have millions of Americans who are unemployed? Why can't the unemployed Americans do the work that we're paying the Indians to do or the Chinese to do? And that would have been a great argument, because the reason that we can't hire those Americans is because the government makes it too expensive to hire them. Because not only the wages are too high, but the mandated benefits are too high. The taxes associated with employment are too high. The litigation and liability associated with employing Americans is too high. So in order to escape taxes and regulation and mandates, in order to stay in business, and so they can keep hiring anybody, businesses need to outsource. See, Romney could have said, look, I know why businesses outsource. I did it. And here's why I did it. It was to escape the big government policies of Obama or people like Obama. If we had a free market, if the government didn't drive up the cost of doing business in this country, if the government didn't drive up the cost of American labor, there would have been no need to outsource. But you know what? Thank God that we do, that we found this little escape valve in order to stay in business so that we didn't have to fire all of our workers. We just had to fire some. But, you know, if I'm president, he could have said, we won't have to fire any, because I'm going to get rid of all these laws that are keeping millions of Americans permanently unemployed and that are the reason that companies are outsourcing. That would have been an opportunity for Obama to take, for Romney to take the high road and really have an argument, really have a debate. Instead, he basically tried to out-Democrat Obama, or maybe be a Democrat light, right? But, you know, what do you want? Coke or Coke Light? If you want Coke, get the real thing. Coke tastes better than Coke Light. So if you're going to be Democrat light, the voters are going to say, nah, no thanks. I'll just have a real Democrat, and I'm going to vote for Obama. Alex is calling in from Brooklyn. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm calling in to attempt to maybe slightly defend Romney a little bit, since you wanted somebody to actually call in for that reason. I agree with you.
It's a challenge.
Yes. I agree with you on basically everything you're saying, but I will say at the very least, Mitt Romney did point out that, one, Canada's corporate tax rate is 15%, and ours is 35%. So at least he pointed that out in a way to kind of say we need to get to that point. And he did also
but what he needed to do, though, was show how the corporate tax rate is not just what the corporations pay, but what the shareholders pay after the money is taxed the first time. So he could have shown how his 14% is not really 14%, but closer to 50%. And in fact, if you added in all the money he gave to charity, more than half of Mitt Romney's money either went to the government or to charity. And he could have put that in perspective and talked about all the investments that otherwise might have been made with that money had it not been siphoned off and sent to the government where it was squandered.
No, I agree. I agree with you 100%. It's kind of a weird position for me to take because it's kind of like the fact he got anything right, I feel like should at least be pointed out. But also, he did say that with his tooth thing, like with China, he's going to get tough on China, blah, blah, blah. He did say that we should attract American businesses, and we need to do, we have to attract businesses here. We want to be attracted to businesses. So at least he said that.
Right.
And he did also say that we need to loosen regulations to get more permits on federal land for gas and oil. So at least he did that,
Yeah, but he kind of limited that. The only time they really discussed that was when it comes to drilling on federal land, and he wanted to manage the federal lands better than Obama managed the federal land. But you can talk about let's make America more attractive to business. How? And how is it that Romney, the only thing, that Obama is making it less attractive. The only thing that Romney will say about Obama and how he's making it less attractive to do business here is by talking about Obamacare and how that is making people reluctant to hire. But then he doesn't really talk about getting rid of it. He talks about replacing it with somebody that sounds to me almost as bad. In fact, in many ways, I can't even differentiate between what Romney claims he wants to do and what Barack Obama has already done. There's not enough daylight between their positions for it to have a clear difference.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying, at the very least, he said those things. That's all I'm saying. At least him.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
You know what? I think it would have been better. I think it would have been better from the beginning had Mitt Romney admitted that Romneycare was a mistake. And that unlike the president, he learns from his mistakes. If he could have said, Romney, I made a mistake as governor. I now regret it because I've learned that it was wrong. I've evolved. I was more liberal when I was younger. But as I've learned more, he could have maybe done that. Instead, he talked about how great it was. It's just that he thought it was up to the states to do those great things, not up to the federal government. But he's saying that he wants his plan in Massachusetts to be a model for the entire country, and the president agrees. In fact, one of the low points of this debate, as far as I'm concerned, and I forgot to mention this, and I'll mention it now for Romney, is when they talked about the GM bailouts. Instead of basically saying that he was for capitalism, he wanted to let them go bankrupt because out of the bankruptcy, a stronger auto industry would have emerged that employed more people and that was more competitive, and we would have preserved the rule of law and the Constitution. Instead of that, he basically tried to say that exactly what he wanted is what we got. He basically said, I wanted bankruptcy. Obama took him through bankruptcy, which is exactly what I said should have happened. He should have explained the difference between the legitimate bankruptcy that he wanted that would have benefited everybody and the phony bankruptcy that benefited the labor unions at the expense of the creditors and at the expense of the auto industry. He can't concede the point that if there were no bailouts, there would be no auto industry. Look, how many airlines have gone bankrupt? There's still an airline industry there. The planes are still flying, even though they've gone bankrupt. The inference is if Obama hadn't saved GM and Chrysler, that they wouldn't exist. Well, Delta's gone bankrupt. United's gone bankrupt. I think 2 times United has gone bankrupt. American is going through bankruptcy. These carriers are still there. I know. I fly in them. They lose my luggage. I know they're there. And so, the automobile industry would still be here. What Romney should have said is it would have been a more vibrant industry. Instead, because the government didn't let a legitimate bankruptcy take place, instead we handed the companies over to the auto unions. That now GM and Chrysler are going to go bankrupt again. And more people are going to lose their jobs. We're going to have a less viable auto industry because of what the president did. Had we taken a free market approach, they wouldn't have to go bankrupt the second time because we would have a more efficient use of these resources. We would put these resources under better management, and they would hire workers under terms that made sense, and we would get the auto industry out from under the boot of the UAW. Instead, Obama keeps the boot right on their throat, and the industry is never going to thrive. Alex, hey, thank you for the call. That's it for today's show. Don't forget forget to tune in tomorrow. Open Line Friday. You've been listening to The Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio. Bye for now.